So in talking about the mind, the social mind, the perception and worldview of people, there's not a better place to talk about that than really in a university setting. That's where we are right now. Because here is where you get your perception of your place in society, or even your worldview. When you're in class, you're going to be given schoolwork and you're going to be given assignments that ultimately challenge your worldviews and your traditional values. And that's the whole point. So, for example, many of the things you're going to be looking at is the ways in which you perceive, let's say, ethics, and you take an ethics course, or the way that you perceive how the social contract is, politically, or just even looking at the psychology of human beings or of gender, and of the many social issues that are advocated for on college campuses. Now, the technical term is called the noosphere, basically the collective mind. It's where you get the word news from, and it's the Greek word for mind or consciousness, and that's what the great wrestling match is for. What is your consciousness? What is your value system? Well, the one great value system that is promoted as the ultimate ethic is tolerance and deconstructing your value system. In other words, what you once thought was a moral standard in your life should be something that is deconstructed and re-looked at. And so that's how you basically deconstruct a person's value system and give them a new collective kind of buy-in for the new value system. And what would that be?
Carl Sagan says we are the frontal lobes of the universe. So we are the universe, being aware of the universe. Just like the brain can perceive itself, well, on a sort of macro level, we are the universe perceiving itself. And these moments of sort of mental expansion, and then seeing the fact that, with our biotechnology, we're manipulating biology. With nanotechnology, we manipulate matter at the level of the atom. The whole freaking thing becomes a creative universe that wakes up, a creative universe that comes alive. And so the singularity is just ultimately a kind of metaphor used to describe the ineffable and indescribable nature of a universe, a creative universe, accelerating in its capacity to be creative. Terence McKenna said the universe is a novelty-engendering universe. It's a universe that sprouts complexity, sprouts new possibility. Kelly says technology is the seventh kingdom of life, subject to the same evolutionary forces. Pierre de Chardin, the Jesuit priest, talks about the omega point, this complexity leading us towards this kind of rapturous transcendence of all previous limits. Eric Davis, who wrote in Technosis, said that eventually the human design process will achieve a kind of infinite velocity where everything becomes linked with everything else and matter becomes mind. Because that's really what's going on. We take in matter of low organization, we put it through our mental filters, and we extrude it as space shuttles and iPhones. So when you look at the stuff, you see wow, Kurzweil's singularity is the same as Pierre de Chardin, the Jesuit priest who was tripping out talking about the omega point, which is the same as Timothy Leary talking about us going from worms into butterflies and transforming ourselves. And it's the same as McKenna talking about a universe that engenders more and more novelty, and is the same as Kevin Kelly's technium. So you see the academics and the writers and the scientists and the sort of psychonauts all saying ultimately the same thing. Isaiah Berlin said, to understand is to perceive patterns. So you start to see the patterns, and it's humanity, it's certain minds just noticing the same thread, the same common denominator, which is kind of this move towards that something. It's like staring into the sun. It's hard to describe, but I think we're going in that direction.
The omega point that Tielhard De Chardin talks about is the omega point of all coming to the same spiritual evolutionary point of oneness, the same social evolutionary point of oneness, the same psychological point. And this process is being developed and broke down in university settings, especially in the area of how you perceive self. That yourself or your self-image is something that needs to be questioned. So it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a male, or if you are now a male and want to be a woman, or if you're a woman and you want to be a male. Know that the ultimate goal is the deconstruction of of value systems, of distinctions, to a world of indistinguishableness. Now, it's not just in university settings that you see this taking place. It's the entire climate in which we live in entertainment and in media. Those are all avenues of education, of communication. So it's very important to lay hold of this understanding when we're getting to the omega point. The lack of distinctions, the deconstruction of value systems that you have held as to be true or so. In a new world ontological view, that truth is progressive and truth is evolutionary and truth is ever shaping and shifting.
Are the concepts of transracial and transgender at all comparable? That's just one of the many questions igniting a social media firestorm over Rachel Dolezal.
At some point, I would need to address the complexity of my identity.
Are you an African-American woman?
I identify as black because it's a little more complex than me identifying as black or answering a question of, are you black or white? I was actually identified when I was doing human rights work in North Idaho as first transracial. Blackness can be defined as philosophical, cultural, biological, a lot of different things, a lot of different people.
Now, the emergent concept of this, the emergent churches or the emergent science, pseudoscience, is that nothing is to be devalued. Everything is to be brought into the equation, whatever it is, whatever is presently existing, to not label it as either good nor evil. It's beyond good and evil. The great prophet of this postmodern age is Nietzsche, where we now deconstruct good and evil to be neither, and it's now 50 shades of gray.
But they don't make Oldsmobiles anymore. I mean, they used to be popular, but the factories have shut down, and eventually the only ones left will be collector's items, relics of an era that has passed. Oldsmobile couldn't keep up with the times, and so it's become more and more something of the past, not the future. For them, not us. For then, not now. For a growing number of people in our modern world, God is a bit like Oldsmobiles. Is God going to be left behind like Oldsmobiles? I don't think so. Because I believe there are other ways, better ways of talking about God and understanding God. Because I believe God is with us and for us. And I believe God is actually ahead of us, calling us and drawing us. A lot of people, when they say, by God ahead, do you mean like same-sex marriage? And yes. And I think that's one of the things you're seeing right now, is you are seeing God pulling us all forward into a greater realization that we need more love. We need more fidelity. We need more monogamy. We need more people who are committed to each other. It's not good for us to be alone.
And that's the concept of this new mind. It is a perpetual lack of discernment and judgment. And those are all to be set aside so this new consciousness can emerge. And that's the point of the emergent theory and the omega point that is talked about by Pierre Tielhard De Chardin. So in discussing this newest, this mind that we're talking about, this collective consciousness that is the new ethos, the new ethic in this way, how is that mind going to ultimately be in opposition to the mind of Christ, to the mind that God said He's developing to those that have a covenant with Him? Well, it gets around the concept of how God's law is written upon the heart of His people. God has a lordship, a dominion, and He says that He reigns over the heart of His people. So ultimately, you're going to see a divergence that will happen between the mind of this world and the prince that is the God of this world. Will be moving people, as Hobbes talks about, a leviathan, one in which has bound you to the, quote, ultimate good of the state or of the world or global state, versus God moving His people towards obedience to His law and His commandments that are born from a different kingdom, a kingdom that's not of this world. And so you're going to have two worlds emerge. That which is the world of Christ, in which he is preparing his people to return and to take them to the New Jerusalem above, versus what's the good of this world. And the ethos or the ethics that this world is pointing towards, and the mind will have to literally come into its conformity to it. And so what you're going to get is those that are not obeying, those that are under covenant with God. There's going to be two groups emerging from this whole thing.